I want to talk about the Japanese art of Kintsugi, which is mending broken pottery with silver or gold. And it actually ends up making the finished product more beautiful and also more resilient because of the irregularity. Similar to how the Great Pyramids are all built with individual blocks that each are uniquely suited for wherever they're placed, but also each of them is slightly different than the other, and that gives more stability to the entire structure. And also we know with electrum, which is an alloy between silver and gold, 70-30 mix roughly I think is the ideal ratio, but it's stronger than gold because it has the brittleness of silver, but it's also more durable than silver, it doesn't tarnish because of the gold that's mixed in. So both of them together makes an irregular ratio, end up making the final product more resilient, stronger. So I think it's a great analogy that reminds us maybe we go through suffering and challenge, separation, in order to become both more beautiful and more resilient on the other side of it. And if you really take this practice to heart, then once you can get to that point where you're celebrating your imperfections, so much so that you're highlighting it for others to see, just like with the art, that's when you finally move into your true authentic self, because you're no longer running away from your flaws because you see them as something that's negative, but instead now you're celebrating them because you recognize that it's only through them that you finally grow into exactly what you're supposed to be, and they actually make you resilient and make you the person you're supposed to be today. So again, you start to realize there's nothing to change about yourself, nothing is wrong with you. And it goes back to the concepts I've been talking about in all of the other videos, which is when you move back into non-judgment, which is neutrality, unconditional love, authenticity, and the only way to do it is, again, accepting both sides of anything in life. In this case, we're talking about yourself. You need to accept both sides of your own self, both the good and the bad, because we all have them, they exist. So trying to deny them is trying to avoid the unavoidable, right? Which is the cause of suffering, according to Buddha. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But once you start to accept both for what they are, and a good way to do that is by recognizing that these so-called negatives or your flaws are actually the reason why you come out stronger and more resilient. So are they so bad? And now that you've accepted both sides of yourself, you can finally be truly authentic. And what's funny about that is not only do your flaws push you to the realization that there's nothing wrong with you, but they also then lead you to your authenticity, which from there you can actually start pursuing what really matters to you, because you won't be able to see what's actually important to you if you're viewing it from a lens of resentment or infatuation, because that's not truly who you are. So in order to really discover what you want in life, you want to start to see things more clearly, see things from a neutral perspective. And that's not when you're in resentment or infatuation. If you're running away from something, or if you feel deep resistance in trying to avoid some kind of pain, then it's likely the things that you're seeking, what you desire at that point, might not be what you actually want, but rather something that's just going to take you away from the thing you're running away from, if that makes sense. So that's why we always want to move back into neutrality, because now we're more likely to understand what's truly meant for us. And in that state, the things that pull you in, the things that magnetize you, are most likely going to be things that are going to put you on the path that's most aligned for you, the thing you're meant to do. And of course, that eventually leads to the world reflecting back more authenticity to you, more of the things that are meant for you and supporting you, and all of a sudden things start to feel effortless. So imagine that all of this, getting to exactly the path you want, everything you've wanted, all comes from recognizing that you're supposed to have flaws. And all of those struggles and difficulties, which you blame as the source of all of your suffering, are actually what's going to lead you to everything you ever wanted. You just need to change the way you see them. You don't need to change them. You don't need to change anything about yourself. So they're actually lessons, they're feedback that's trying to push you to exactly what's meant for you. But first, you need to learn to accept them as they are. So again, it goes back to Kintsugi. If you take a look at the pottery, it's much easier for us to look at the end product and say it was definitely worth it breaking and repairing and mending it, because now I can see how much more beautiful and how much stronger it looks. But obviously, the work is recognizing this whole process while you're still in the middle of it. While that pottery is broken, having the faith to realize that it's not actually broken, it's just in a process of being transformed from one form to another. And I just need to trust that this process is going to be what takes me to exactly what I want, which is the end product of strength, resilience, authenticity, and more beauty. So this is why we do this entire work, right? Because we don't want to have to wait for the wisdom of the ages, right? Which is wisdom that comes from time, when you can look back at something and finally reflect, now I can see why that was a good thing. Yes, that's good. But ideally, we want to learn how to use all of this information to deal with things while we're in the middle of them. Because then you can start to course correct, then you can start to shift your perspectives immediately, and you don't need to suffer as much. It goes back to the idea that you get where you need to eventually, but how much do you want to suffer? What path are you going to take? The more you deviate, the more you're going to suffer, because suffering is nothing more than a feedback mechanism to bring you back into balance. And that all comes down to being able to balance out your perceptions in real time. So just to end things, this is why it's always important for you to do the inner work, to realize what kind of shadows, what kind of things have I not accepted in myself. Because if you ever come across anybody that says he doesn't have any shadows, then he's either unaware of them, because everything is two-sided, right? They exist, or he knows it, but he's secretly repressing them because he hasn't accepted them, which is the case for many people. But the thing is, what you resist persists. You think by repressing something that it just no longer exists, but actually what happens is it becomes even louder, and it has no choice but to be reflected out in your world. And it's going to feel like everywhere you look, you have things that are specifically triggering that aspect of you. Why? Because it's an invitation for you to finally deal with it, to finally accept it as it is, and not label it as something that's bad. Because if you do, then you're trying to run away from something that's part of you. How do you think that's going to go? Okay, once again, if you try to obtain the unobtainable or avoid the unavoidable, you're going to end up suffering. So then your job is to learn to accept it. And the best way to do it is change the way you see it by balancing out your perceptions. What if all of your flaws, what if all your suffering was there for a purpose? Because if it's not, then suffering for the sake of suffering is just pain. It's just suffering. It's going to feel like hell. But suffering for the sake of learning to then adjust and course correct and move into what's best for you through acceptance and authenticity, well, that sounds like enlightenment now.